The drug high. Falling in love does not begin as a poetic experience. It begins as a chemical storm. When attraction turns into early-stage romantic love, the brain enters a state that, neurologically speaking, is extremely similar to stimulant drug intoxication. Brain imaging studies consistently show that the same reward circuits activated by substances like cocaine are strongly activated when a person looks at or thinks about someone they are deeply in love with. The key player here is dopamine. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical in the simplistic sense. It is the molecule of motivation, craving, and pursuit. It drives the brain to focus intensely on one goal and to repeat behaviors that bring reward. In early love, dopamine floods the brain's reward pathways. The loved person becomes the primary source of anticipated reward. Their messages, their presence, their approval all trigger dopamine release. The brain learns very quickly that this person equals reward. At the same time, the brain reduces activity in systems responsible for satiation. This is why early love feels endless and insatiable. You do not feel full. You want more contact, more reassurance, more interaction. This neurochemical state explains why love feels euphoric, energizing, and obsessive. It also explains why it impairs judgment. The brain is not optimized for balance in this phase. It is optimized for pursuit. From a biological perspective, this makes sense. Early attachment must be intense enough to overcome hesitation, fear, and social risk. A muted response would not produce bonding. The problem is that the brain does not distinguish between chemical reward from a person and chemical reward from a drug. The circuitry is the same. That is why early love feels addictive. Because neurologically, it is. The blindness. One of the most confusing aspects of romantic love is how intelligent, rational people suddenly tolerate behaviors they would normally reject. Red flags become invisible. Excuses come easily. Logic feels distant. This is not a moral failure. It is a neurological shift. During early romantic attachment, activity in the prefrontal cortex decreases. The prefrontal cortex is the region responsible for critical thinking, impulse control, long-term planning, and moral judgment. It is the part of the brain that says, wait, analyze, and consider consequences. When love intensifies, this region becomes less active. At the same time, emotional and reward-related regions dominate. The brain shifts from evaluation mode to bonding mode. Instead of asking, is this good for me? The brain asks, how do I maintain this connection? This temporary deactivation explains romantic blindness. Flaws are not unseen. They are deprioritized. The brain literally assigns them less importance. Negative information is filtered out because it threatens the reward source. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. Early bonding requires tolerance. If the brain analyzed every imperfection with full intensity, attachment would fail before it formed. However, this also explains why people often wake up later and wonder how they missed obvious problems. They did not miss them. Their brain temporarily chose bonding over evaluation. Love is not blind. It is neurologically selective. The obsession. Romantic obsession is often romanticized. In reality, it has a very specific neurochemical signature. During early-stage love, serotonin levels drop significantly. This is counterintuitive because serotonin is often associated with happiness. In fact, serotonin plays a major role in stability, calm, and cognitive control. Low serotonin is associated with obsessive thinking. This is why people in love experience intrusive thoughts. The loved person occupies mental space constantly. Thoughts loop, memories replay, imagined futures repeat over and over. Interestingly, people with obsessive-compulsive disorder show similar serotonin patterns. The brain struggles to disengage from certain thought loops. Love-induced obsession is not pathological in itself. It is temporary and context-driven. But neurologically, it uses the same mechanisms. The brain becomes locked onto one mental object. This obsession reinforces bonding. Constant mental presence strengthens emotional attachment. The person becomes integrated into the brain's default thought patterns. However, this also makes early love fragile, because obsession increases emotional vulnerability. When attention is monopolized by one person, emotional regulation depends on them. This is why early love feels exhilarating but unstable. The brain is chemically tilted toward fixation. The attachment trap. Attachment is not the same as attraction. Attraction ignites quickly. Attachment builds slowly and holds tightly. Two hormones play a central role here: oxytocin and vasopressin. Oxytocin is released during physical closeness, sexual contact, emotional intimacy, and trust-building moments. It promotes bonding, safety, and emotional connection. Vasopressin contributes to long-term attachment and pair bonding, particularly through protective and territorial behaviors. Together, these chemicals create emotional glue. Once attachment is established, the brain associates the partner with safety and stability. This association persists even when the relationship becomes harmful. This is why people stay in toxic relationships, not because they are weak, but because their brain has encoded the relationship as a secure attachment figure. Breaking that bond triggers anxiety, fear, and emotional distress similar to physical danger. The brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar uncertainty. Oxytocin does not distinguish between healthy and unhealthy bonds. It strengthens connection regardless of quality. This is why cycles of conflict and reconciliation can deepen attachment rather than weaken it. Stress followed by relief increases bonding. The attachment system is not designed to optimize happiness. It is designed to prevent separation. The Coolidge Effect. Human beings like to believe that desire fades because of emotional reasons: routine, boredom, lack of effort, or incompatibility. Biology tells a more uncomfortable story. The Coolidge Effect is a well-documented biological phenomenon observed in many mammals, including humans. It describes the tendency for sexual interest to decrease with a familiar partner and to reappear strongly in the presence of a new one. This is not a failure of love. It is a mechanism of novelty. From a neurobiological perspective, novelty triggers dopamine release far more powerfully than familiarity. A new partner represents uncertainty, unpredictability, and potential reward. The brain responds by increasing motivation, arousal, and attention. Long-term partners, even deeply loved ones, become neurologically familiar. The brain predicts their behavior. Dopamine responses weaken, not because attraction disappears, but because novelty disappears. This does not mean monogamy is unnatural. It means it is biologically demanding. Maintaining desire over time requires conscious effort precisely because the brain is wired to respond automatically to novelty, not stability. Infidelity in this context is not always driven by dissatisfaction. It can be driven by the brain's reward system seeking stimulation rather than connection. Understanding the Coolidge Effect does not excuse behavior. It explains temptation. Biology creates the impulse. Values determine the response. The jealousy instinct. Jealousy feels personal, emotional, and irrational. Biologically, it is none of those things. Jealousy is an evolved defense mechanism. From an evolutionary standpoint, reproduction carried enormous risk. For males, uncertainty about paternity threatened genetic continuity. For females, loss of partner investment threatened survival of offspring. Jealousy evolved as a response to these threats. It heightens vigilance. It increases attention to rivals. It motivates protective behaviors. It discourages abandonment. Neurologically, jealousy activates threat detection circuits in the brain. The amygdala becomes active. Stress hormones increase. Cognitive focus narrows. This is why jealousy feels urgent and overwhelming. The brain treats relational threat as survival threat. Modern contexts confuse this system. Social media, constant exposure to alternatives, and ambiguous signals trigger jealousy mechanisms far more frequently than they evolved to handle. The brain reacts as if lineage is at risk, even when no real danger exists. Jealousy is not a sign of love. It is a sign of perceived threat. Unchecked, it becomes destructive. Understood, it becomes manageable. The withdrawal. Heartbreak is not metaphorical pain. It is literal. When a deep attachment bond breaks, the brain reacts in the same way it reacts to physical injury. Brain imaging studies show that social rejection and loss activate the same neural regions involved in physical pain processing. This is because attachment bonds are encoded as survival relevant. When the bond is severed, the brain enters withdrawal. Dopamine drops sharply. Oxytocin levels decrease. Stress hormones spike. The nervous system enters a state of imbalance. This produces real physical symptoms: chest tightness, nausea, fatigue, insomnia, appetite loss, and immune suppression. Heartbreak feels unbearable because, neurologically, it is experienced as danger plus deprivation. The brain has lost its primary source of reward, safety, and regulation. This is why logic fails during heartbreak. The brain is not seeking explanation, it is seeking relief. Heartbreak is not weakness, it is neurochemical withdrawal. The recovery. Recovery from heartbreak is not about getting over it. It is about rewiring the brain. During attachment, neural pathways link the loved person to reward, comfort, identity, and future projection. After separation, those pathways remain active. Every reminder reactivates them. Neuroplasticity allows change, but it requires time and reduced reinforcement. On average, significant neural rewiring begins after several weeks of reduced contact and emotional stimulation. Full restructuring can take months, sometimes longer, depending on attachment intensity and duration. This is why no contact works neurologically. It deprives the brain of reinforcement signals. Gradually, unused pathways weaken. New routines, new environments, and new social bonds accelerate this process by creating alternative reward circuits. Recovery is not linear. The brain fluctuates between old and new patterns before stabilizing, but rewiring always happens. The brain is plastic by design. It adapts to loss the same way it adapts to love. Love feels mystical because its mechanisms are hidden. Once exposed, they feel unsettling, but empowering. Understanding love does not ruin it. It gives you clarity inside it. If you want more content that strips emotion down to biology, subscribe. Explaining things simply.